My whole life has been shaped by India, or let's say all of my adult life. One of the things I love and pottery making was with the matkas. You know, there's a quality of her brush that goes in and her hand stroke that you feel the grace of her hand. One of the things that I so admired about many of the Hindus that I met was that in their household shrines, they would have those elements that had been meaningful to them. And so often I would see a Christian or even Muslim, or a Sikh, representation.
We try and understand and put a scientific logic to everything, but there is energy. There are things that we can plan, we can decide, we can think that we've got it all sorted, but then there would be a divine intervention and one can deny it or one can accept that gracefully.
Women in India do not identify themselves as victims. They identify themselves everywhere as finding creative ways to overcome adversity. And so what I try to do in my books and in my lectures to talk about is to allow their stories to come forward.
Hi, in today's episode, we have with us Stephen P. Huyler, a distinguished art historian, cultural anthropologist, photographer, and author who has spent over 5 decades exploring and documenting India's sacred arts, crafts, and rural traditions. His immersive journeys, averaging 4 months annually in Indian villages, have deepened his understanding of the country's diverse cultural fabric. Stephen has served as a consultant and guest curator for over 25 major exhibitions in many places, including at the Smithsonian and the Museum of International Folk Art. Renowned for his photography, his work has been showcased in solo exhibitions at institutions such as the Asian Art Museum and the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. And there is more. Stephen is an author of 6 acclaimed books, including Painted Prayers and Daughters of India. Stephen's memoir, Transformed by India, debuts in January 2025. He lives in Camden, Maine, while continuing to split his time lecturing internationally and engaging with the India he cherishes deeply. Today, he's here with us to talk to us about his book, Transformed by India. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. And
so, Stephen, I'm very keen to know what motivated you to write Transformed by India. What was that inspiration to travel to India, like the start, and, the experience that closely over the past several decades, how has it shaped, your writing for this book?
My whole life has been shaped by India, or let's say all of my adult life. I came, on my way. I left to arrive in India when I was 19 and arrived in India on my 20th birthday, spending it at the Golden Temple in Amritsar. I crossed the border from Pakistan right in 1971, right before that last war began, and sort of rushed to Amritsar from the border and was in the Golden Temple. And what a place to spend one's 20th birthday. But to answer your question, I come from a family, my mother was born and raised in Korea. My grandparents were her parents were born and raised in Korea. Both of them, they were educators. I come from a family of educators, but my father actually served, under Chiang Kai-shek in the Chinese army. He was transferred from the American army and he spoke, Mandarin fluently. And so I was raised, my mother spoke Japanese, Korean, English, I don't know, other languages and Mandarin. And so, all of that, there were so many, Asians in our house, and I grew up in a small town called Ojai, California, and there are a lot of Indians living there, including, at that time, Jiddu Krishnamurti, the philosopher. And so I was an odd little kid who, even though my family were fairly strong Christians, I was interested in other ways of thinking. And so I went to hear Krishnamurti as a boy. I was taken by friends of my parents. There's a theosophical center in my town, the largest theosophical center in the United States. And they gave lectures on different points of view. And then I started working for a woman named Beatrice Wood, who was a well-known American artist. And she was a close friend of Rukmini Devi. and Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay. So I met Rukmini Devi. She invited me to come. Kamala Devi wrote me a letter and said, please, please come. I was interested through this friend Beatrice in documenting Indian craftsmanship and folk art. I love things made by hand. I love things that show the artistry of the person who has made them, and the craftsmanship, like this, which was made by the women of Seva. I like witnessing that, but it could have been anywhere in the world. It was simply that these people were so kind to invite me. And as I told you, I arrived on my 20th birthday in Amritsar, and right thereafter came down to Delhi and was invited by Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay to meet with her. And she set up my entire first trip to India. And she wrote letters of introduction to leaders of the crafts world, people that were women largely who'd set up crafts cooperatives everywhere in India, and they invited me to stay in their homes. So I came to India and traveled throughout the country at age 20, staying in the homes of Indian freedom fighters and largely strong women who had taken the torch from Gandhiji through Kamala Deviji to try to use traditional craftsmanship as a form of identity for what is the culture there. And I came not to glorify tradition, but to find the ways that are viable within Indian traditions and ritual ways of doing things that are viable for the contemporary world. So I'm as interested in contemporary technologies and contemporary uses as I am of traditional technologies. There is a marriage, and India, I'm glad to say, does that better than any other area in the world that I know of. And that I'm very proud to be doing this work. Very, 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 very glad I've been asked to do it.
You've really spoken to my heart, actually, Stephen, when you talk about handmade products, because they all have a story. And, the joy I always feel that of a handmade product is to turn it the other way around and look at the knots that's been tied.
Absolutely. Yeah, about this lining here. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's the knots. It's those little, the thread that's gone in through their mouth into that needle, and, those nimble hands that have really produced a product together. So I totally love Indian arts and crafts myself.
Excuse me, Mohua. But this book I did, that was my doctoral dissertation, but also it's a book published by MAPN in India and the IGNCA. And it's on clay sculpture. And one of the things I love, and pottery making, one of the things I love is with the matkas, with whatever it is, the clay will show the thumbprints or the fingerprints of the kumar that made it. There's a quality, or the woman who is painting it after firing. There's a quality of her brush that goes in and her hand stroke that you feel the grace of her hand, and it goes into the beauty of the painted matka itself. Those things, there is an invaluable quality to them. Yes. Absolutely. There are very many good things to mass-produced products, and we use them. All of us use them. And they are helpful to our lives, and they help us to navigate and to live in better ways in many things. But there's also a value of those things that reflect the human manipulation of them, the ways in which they're formed. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. You spoke to my heart right there. Yeah,
me too. They're birthed through the hands, because I think, Stephen, right on this podcast, I'm saying that we should travel to Kolkata, because there's a huge terracotta temple that's built there, and the terracotta work that you also find there is absolutely gorgeous.
I have spent years documenting Bengali terracotta. I know very well. I have a deep, deep love of it. And then, the ancient Bengali terracottas from Chandoketagar that are just coming out, that are as magnificent as any of the
Yes.
finest sculptures in stone or the
Absolutely.
finest miniature paintings on paper ever made and done in terracotta in Bengal back in the 3rd century BC to the 5th century AD. I mean, extraordinary work. Yeah.
It is
Sorry, we're
extraordinary.
getting off point.
But that's the joy of talking to another enthusiast just like me who loves arts and crafts and anything that, God's hands that are given to us, we create with that, right? And so many of these artists don't even realize actually when they're doing this, how much they're in touch with their own divine. So I need to ask
that
you.
is so true. That is so true. So, excuse me, Amoha, but it's such a great conversation because your words, it sparks the divine. So when I was invited into all of those homes on that first trip, I was a boy raised in a Christian family who had studied Hinduism and was interested in Indian religions, had studied in college, in university. But, what was I to know? But I was invited into these homes where the rituals of the home, which are generally governed by the women, I was like a fly on the wall where I've always had this quality of being quiet and observing. And I watched how much those rituals, that aspect of acknowledging the divine, how much it meant to the family householders and how it enhanced their relationships. And so as I began to witness that over years, that's when I began to realize that I needed to expose to the West the aspects of Hinduism, because that was most people that I worked with were Hindus, and lived with, those aspects that were so different than the way in which Hinduism is marketed in the West. With the large scale gurus, the sort of godmen, and that you must do it in this certain way. While as what I witnessed in India, and which I still witness in India, is that sense of that flame that you mentioned, the glowing flame of relationship to the divine, that it reflects itself differently in each family that I visit, in each village, in each home, and that Hinduism accepts that whole thing. There's an umbrella. There is no one right way. And that is what I've tried to do in my, I don't know where it is, my book, Meeting God There. I did a big exhibition for the Smithsonian, the National Museum of Asian Art, in Washington on Hinduism. It was supposed to be open for 6 months. It was open for 4 years about practical Hinduism. They had more people come to that than any other show they ever had. So then I did this, traveling show called Meeting God about practical Hinduism and Jainism and Sikhism, the way in which it overflows and fills people's lives. And not that it's not about proselytizing. It's not about saying this is better. It's quite the opposite of that. It's saying, I do what feels right for me. Yeah. I pray in this way. This is my family's deities and my home, which is sacred to me. And so I do these rituals and it enhances the life of myself and my children and my grandchildren going forward. It's those things that have enhanced my life and what my new book is about. It's about witnessing those and being opened to my own blindness as a foreigner to what are the strengths of India. And those strengths are so extraordinary. And can I find ways to convey those to the West, not coming to India with something to prove? That was not the purpose that I came. But can I just be open, quiet? I'm a writer. I always have been. But I spent 10 years before I wrote the first word for publication, because I felt too many people were coming to India and writing books from their first trip or from their initial research, which they were coming to try to prove a point that they knew before they came to India. Well, how can they be open if they're proving a point they already knew? And you can prove anything in India. It's so diverse. But if I could be quiet and listen and let the voices of the people tell me who they are and what they are, then maybe I could convey that to the West. And that's what I've tried to do in my books, in my exhibitions, and in my photography.
Amazing, Stephen. I'm just, I'm totally traveling with you as you're talking, because this is a podcast that's so close to my heart, Stephen, because we're speaking on a subject that's equally close to me. Let's talk a little bit about your personal transformation, during your time in India, and in a country like India, it is challenging, right? There is the belief system, there is an identity, and then there's your worldview, right? So tell me its impact on your book that's transformed by India, and that point when the transformation happened, Stephen. Do you remember that? Is it lucid with you?
Well, there are many moments of transformation, but one that I can speak to directly. I was raised a Christian, going to church, from a family of devout Christians. And I respect my heritage very much. And I come from good people. But there are attitudes that Christians can espouse. I don't mean all Christians. I only mean the way in which I was raised, which may not be open to the belief systems of others, because in the church we were taught that there is only one right way, and it's ours. And so other people are misguided. I told you, I was in so many different homes. I was witnessing those aspects of devotion that began to change me, began to open my mind, and began to challenge my preconceptions. But I think I was holding on until I began to write this book, Meeting God. And I was in a village, and I write about it in the preface of this book. And that was a very hard thing to write about, honestly, to make myself as vulnerable as that preface does. But because I'm honest in it. And I was in a small village in what is now called Odisha, but was called Orissa when I spent months and months and months, over years in Odisha. And in this small village, I was invited to witness the transformation of a deity, a Grama Devata, the deity that was the goddess that was embodied that village. And they asked Chandi to come in for a specific reason, and I was allowed to witness and to photograph that process. And I came in thinking I was just going to see something that I knew was a great honor to be able to be there and witness and to photograph. But I felt her presence. I felt the entire atmosphere of everything change. It changed. At that moment, it changed. Everything. Suddenly, it was not just this Grama Devata, which was a community that was friendly to me and welcoming to me, but it was their deity. Do you see? It was them. And suddenly, it was subsumed by something that was so powerful and so great, and that I was transformed. I was transformed. And so what I realized also while I was working on this, I was in South India. One of my mentors was a South Indian woman who unfortunately died in 2001, but named Suniti Narayan. And Suniti and I would work together. Suniti was India's first female official guide. But so I had been leading a tour once a year for the Smithsonian, to places that other tourists don't go. And, she was so extraordinary that we began working together and she would open doors for me. So we were in a Mariamman shrine, a temple, that's really only for women in near to, Madurai, not far from Madurai in Tamil Nadu. And, we were in this shrine, in this temple. And I realized at that moment that this was after the Chandi experience. I realized when I was doing a puja there that I had made a vow there, or a vow to Mariamman in a previous life, that I would do this work. Now,
Oh, wow.
you can discount that. It could just be my own little fantasy. I don't know. I can't say. But
There's
this
so
is
many
what
things we don't
means.
understand, actually, Stephen, about life around us. We try and understand and put a scientific logic to everything, but there is energy. There are things that, we can plan, we can decide, we can think that we've got it all sorted, but then there would be a divine intervention. And one can deny it or one can accept that gracefully. So I get the goosebumps when I'm listening to you. Because
Mohua, I've never told that story it's not in my book, and I've never told that last story in any this is it. But you asked the right question at the right time. And it was, so going forward, am I Hindu? Well, I don't know what I am. I think I'm a mix, as Hinduism.
like a river, you are, Stephen.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Perhaps, one of the things that I so admired about many of the Hindus that I met was that in their household shrines, they would have those elements that had been meaningful to them. And so often I would see a Christian or even Muslim, or a Sikh, representation within a Hindu shrine, because somebody in the home, the mother, the father, an uncle, a grandparent, was so inspired by hearing someone speak or by watching the generosity of what that person did for a community or whatever, that they are honoring that. Well, right below me here, have my own puja room, and it is a puja room, and it has a shrine, and I do puja there, but I also have a cross in there. I have a painting of Mary. I'm an amalgamation.
I see that, Stephen. You're a river. You're a river that has to run its course, and then finally it reaches the sea. And I think that sea is that whole awareness, right? That you receive over the years, that finally we are all one. We are all seeking the same things in life. Some of us are fortunate to get all those, lessons of awareness, that eventually we are really a speck in this universe, and we are all guided with the cosmic force, whether we deny it or not.
And there is no one right way.
There
are
is no one
so
right way.
many ways to reach the divine. And India has taught me that. That answers the question. That is my transformation. It's to recognize that each person I meet, and in some ways, I've always known that. I've always had that sense. When I was a small boy growing up, my best friend was someone who was called mentally retarded. And I never judged him as being less than, because he was remarkable. And now I realize that it was probably autistic, and he had a tremendous intelligence, but it expressed itself in different ways. But the point being that I try to let each person speak for who they are. And a lot of my work, because my mentorship has been women, has been listening to and trying to present Indian women's stories as they want to be heard. I think one of the reasons I do that is that when I would come back and tell American audiences, because I lecture or whatever, or friends, I would say that I'm working with Indian women. They'd say, "Oh, those poor women, they have such a hard time." And always, almost without exception, the first response was, some sort of pity. And I found that offensive, because why I do my book, Painted Prayers was the first one, and Daughters of India and Sonabai and others, they're about, yes, women everywhere in the world have many ordeals to overcome. And it is a male-dominated world. By my type, I'm tall, white, and American, for God's sakes. I represent the worst of it. But, but women in India do not identify themselves as victims. They identify themselves, where I meet women everywhere, as finding creative ways to overcome adversity. And so what I try to do in my books and in my lectures to talk about is to allow their stories to come forward. So may I just say one thing? So I did my book, Daughters of India, and I was brought to India to tour about it. And it's a little daunting as a white American male to talk in India about Indian women, right? I mean, who the hell am I to do that? And so the most daunting part was going into Kolkata, where, of course, the reputation is for very strong and outspoken women, feminists. So I was invited to give a lecture and launch the book there. And there was a group of about 800 to 1,000 women. And I went into this hall and I was showing photographs and telling the women's stories, right? So I was presented, and there was a sea of rather seething women out there who I could see were just, who is this person, trying to tell us about us? And who does he think he is, this male, arrogant male? And about 15 minutes in, I could see them relaxing. And when you're giving a lecture, you can see the audience, especially because the lighting is there.
The energy.
And you see the first rows especially, but it kept going back. And there were lights in the audience, and I saw them relax. And about halfway through, I knew they were with me. And by the end, those same leading feminists wanted selfies taken with me. It was so wonderful. It was so great and what they said was, we tend to be provincial. You're telling us stories about women in South Kannada district, Karnataka, or an old woman in Tamil Nadu, what she wants to be known for, or what someone is who's working out in the desert, Thar Desert in Rajasthan, or in Kathiawar, or whatever. These women, or in Madhya Pradesh, these women want, they all have their own voices, and we don't get to hear them. So that was, that felt good.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that must have been a fantastic experience, Yeah. So, come on, we can't deny that in the Western world, there's a lot of misunderstanding and misrepresentation, of Indian culture, spirituality.
It sure is.
Yeah, they only think that, we have elephants in our country and we've got snakes all around us. So I'm sure the snake, stereotype has changed, but then elephants, I don't think changes. And there is so much more to India. So tell us a little bit, about these aspects that you probably had to deal with when you, started your.
I will. And yes, gladly, Mohua. So the thing is that because so many South Asians live in the United States, or I did my doctorate in London, and we're living in Britain too. But I realized that, and most of the people that I know have exposure in one way or another, usually a doctor or a nurse who is Indian, and whom they like very much, and they may have been to their home for a meal, or their children go to school together or something like that. But what I've realized is that those people who are here in the United States, I'm in Maine right now, who are in the United States are very different than those that I meet in the villages. Not that they are less than, greater than, better than, more, whatever. It's simply that they are outside of India. And what I've been trying to represent is, what is the pulse the pulse of the people of India? What are the daily lives? What is it really express? Are those voices? What do those people want? What do they try to achieve? They're never going to come to the United States. They're not going to be a doctor. They're not going to be selected to go to IIT and whatever it might be, and go to Silicon Valley and make millions. That's not going to happen to most of these people. So what are their aspirations? What do they want? What is their voice? And that's what I tried to bring to the American public with a lot of success. People, I watch in the same way that I watched the change of that audience of hostile women in Kolkata. I've watched American audiences for decades alter as I tell these stories, because they're tender stories of the people who have opened their homes to me and who share their lives with me and what they want. For example, you asked, how have I changed? When I was doing my survey of for Daughters of India, and I interviewed more than 1,000 women throughout the country, and I've traveled in every district in India. That's what I do. I travel, and I try to understand the pulse of the Indian people. And so I interviewed women all over. But then I realized that I didn't want to write a book that was just yet another general discussion of Indian women. That was not needed. So I instead chose 20 women from as many different facets of Indian womanhood as I could, to an age bracket, an economic bracket, an education levels, to talk. And I would do a portrait of them and let them speak in their own voices. Well, I realized that I needed something that really showed another side one of the sides of India that is perceived as most downtrodden. So I went to the airport slums of Mumbai, and I was afraid. This is before what was that called? Slumdog Millionaire. Yeah, this is before that, because I didn't like that film, but because it was exploitative. But what happened? It did the opposite of what I found. Slumdog Millionaire. What I found were women in these circumstances of extreme poverty and lives that had been so deeply challenged. The woman I chose, I had lived for years in just a paper and plastic house and had babies with a drunk husband who wasn't there for her, babies in the monsoon with the rain coming down. She described that. She described that to me. This proud, lovely woman who had worked so hard that now she was a sweeper at the international airport and had her own housing that she had built by herself with her children, in a street that was so narrow. It's this wide, right? The street. I mean, it was tiny. And outside she did her rangoli every morning, and she was Buddhist because they were Dalit and had been converted to Buddhism. So I was able to bring that story in. And she was so proud of how she'd been able to change her life. It's those things. Those are transformative. And if I can tell those stories, then she doesn't see herself as a victim, that woman. She saw herself as the ways in which she had overcome this adversity.
She overcame the odds. I mean, you're making me cry, Stephen, when I'm actually traveling with you, when you say that in that little house that she did her rangoli, the pride, of having built something in spite of the adversity.
It was spotlessly clean. There was and I ate gladly. She created a meal for me, and of course, let me tell you one thing I taught myself years ago. Nobody taught me this one. When I go into poor areas, because everyone will always invite me in for food, but what I'm afraid is that I am making then the children or family members go without because they are feeding me. So I realized a long time ago, 40 years ago, what I do is I go to a market on the way to a rural community, and I buy fruit and vegetables, and I have it in my pack. And when I arrive in a village, I will be asked of course, for tea and for a meal. And I say, well, I would love to come in, but I have these vegetables that need to be cooked. Because otherwise they're going to go off. Could you possibly use those? And so then I'm able to accept their kindness and their generosity and experience their fabulous cooking, which of course is regionally different from area to area, and not deprive them or their children or their grandparents or whoever it might be from a good and healthy meal. And so, there are ways to do it. But I was invited a number of times to this, one woman's, house, for meals and, in the slums. And of course I stayed healthy. It didn't make me say, those things that people bring in with them, my own fears that I brought in with me were unfounded. Because humans, we have a capacity to rise above. And in India, everywhere, there is such pride in keeping the home. The home is sacrosanct.
It is.
Keeping it clean. And keeping it a temple. Yeah.
It is the
for
temple.
The family to grow up in.
Absolutely. It is the temple.
I'm very careful with that. And I admire that deeply.
Of course, it needs somebody like you, sensitive, and to be aware, to realize that that somebody would go hungry when they're going to give you a meal. And I don't think that whole awareness also, it's your own, Stephen, and you need to embrace that. Because when I'm listening to you, I do see you for who you are. And I think it's wonderful.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yes.
Well, the one thing that's been hard about doing this book, the new memoir, is that, and actually this isn't the book because it hasn't been printed yet. It's the cover of the book with a fake one inside. But I haven't yet seen the printed book. But the thing that was difficult about it is it's a memoir, so it's about me, but my work is about others. So to focus it on me is hard. I don't know quite how to do that gracefully. It's not.
Let me do that for you, Stephen. Obviously, you're in love with India, and it is fascinating
deeply.
that, you're deeply in love with India. And of course, being, from the first world, if I may use the word, who won't be aware of what, it is really like to walk in through those gullies, as they are called in India, those little lanes. Of
course they're called gullies, yeah.
The lanes, and then when it rains, it can be really, really crazy. You need the tenaciousness, of a different kind to be able to withstand all of that. And I really understand that, because I was raised by a very strong and feisty mother, and I learned sustainability. I learned so many things because that was our way of life, being from a really middle class family where we learned that things are to be used again and again,
Yes,
and you pass on clothes,
Me too. Yeah.
And cousins, you get cousins' old clothes and you give your, woolen clothes. And so it's fantastic. I mean, it's amazing. So you've been working for decades, right, to explore the connections between art, culture, and spirituality, which really comes through, Stephen, when we talk to each other. Was there any amount of epiphany that gave you the perspective that led you to this quest? And I can see that this quest is never ending, Stephen. I can sense that.
I don't know if this answers your question. When I was a little boy, my father was a teacher, but he was also a cowboy, and he represented he was a very fine horseman, and he represented that heritage of sort of male, strong, mountain, whatever. And I wasn't like that. I was the youngest of three children. My brother and my sister were both, my brother was a cowboy, my sister at that time, and my sister, was a horsewoman. And, when I was a little boy, I was very attracted to Native American culture. This is truly the key. You asked, was there an epiphany? And when I was 8, I was invited by some Native Americans who lived in a teepee. The teepee is a conical house.
It's called TP.
A teepee, yeah, a conical canvas house made of poles, and they lived in it, and they lived the rituals of the Native American. And I was invited to spend a weekend there. And I witnessed those rituals, and I witnessed how important it was for them to live them. And that was honoring, Mother Earth, Father Sky, honoring the four directions, honoring everything that they touched and ate,
Oh, wow. That's
everything
so
that they
beautiful.
did. And that was the culture that was suppressed. That was the culture that my culture was saying is not necessary. I learned at an early age to be, I'm going to call it anti-imperialist. I
That's a
am,
very strong word.
yes, I am anti-imperialist in every sense. As an American, against any aspect of American imperialism, and anyone that believes that they can go in and that their culture is superior to someone else's and that they have a right to subject that culture to their own. That to me is as close to a concept of evil as there is. For me, it's about opening myself to learning from others. And when I was that small boy in that teepee with those Native Americans, witnessing those rituals that were so suppressed, I decided that I would do spend my life doing that, trying to find it. And when it changed, because when I was given an avenue into going to India, because I was told by Rukmini Devi Arundel of Kalakshetra, and whom I met, and by Kamla Devi, who wrote me, that many of the traditions of India were being so suppressed, had been under the British, and under contemporary India, there was a wish to move so rapidly into the industrialized contemporary world that a lot of things were being lost. That would I come and help record them before they were gone? And that to me married very much with what those two Native Americans were doing with their own culture. And so that was my epiphany. Does that make
Oh, yeah.
sense?
Of
Yeah.
course it does. Yeah. These are, this also reflects the things that you feel that would touch you because, these are things that are very close to a person's heart. It's part of their culture. It's part of, I guess, their own divine connection with their ancestors
But
because that's what they carry forward.
it's also being deeply affected by watching one culture being suppressed by another.
Oh, yes, of course.
One culture that had, to me, so much richness and really very beautiful devotion that was being suppressed and being told that they were not worthy. And that I found echoed in India when I first came there.
But India is very resilient. I mean, India has been able to stand up, in spite of all the conquests, in spite of all that has happened in our history till today. A lot of the traditions, of course, have kind of, because I think there's modernization in India too. And,
there should be. Yeah.
Yeah, there should be. But along with that, a lot of the culture also dies, because festivals, food, all of that. I mean, I keep talking about the history of food, and that's something very, very personal to me because there are so many recipes I do not know how to make that my mother used to make. And
I'm a total foodie. I was trained as a chef, so I just love food. I love preparations. I love learning how to cook something new. So yes, yeah.
So,
May I say one other thing? And Oh, no, I'm so sorry. Please go ahead. I just lost it for a second. And it does feel important that I tell you this one thing, but I've lost it for a second.
You're going to come back to it, but during this season, there is this beautiful gur called the Nolen gur. It's a jaggery that
Yes.
is available only during winters in Bengal, and my mother makes this beautiful pancake at home. With this jaggery and coconut
Oh,
shavings.
I've had it. I've had it because of the Bengali family I lived with in Delhi. And she would make it in January. It was so good. It was
Yeah,
so
it's
good.
got that nutty flavor. And
Yeah, yeah.
and I keep like now when I watch her make it with her, and her hands shiver because she's older now. And I keep thinking that this recipe comes to an end because my son, who's living out of India, has not experienced this on a daily basis because, cultures are slowly really, they are also shifting and moving into ways where it's global and yet there is no connection also to their roots. And I always feel that a connection to your roots is like a homecoming.
Yes.
Um,
But
you know,
I did remember what I was going to say. Um, when I came to India, I did come at the right time, in 1971. I came at a time when I had this marvelous mentorship from Kamala Devi ji and Rukmini Devi ji and so many others, that helped to form me and set me on my path. And they introduced me to people, and wherever I went, those people mentored me. But everywhere I went, without exception, Indians that met me and asked me what I was doing told me that I was trying to lead India backward. I was told that thousands of times. And luckily I had the other voices coming to me and the other, we'll say mentorship or tutelage, right? Of the people who said, no, keep doing this. So I did. I'm stubborn, but I have not heard a single Indian say that in 30 years. That was, I believe, the legacy of being under the thumb or the foot of others, of the British, of another people, where Indians were taught that their traditional cultures were in some way less valuable than British or European traditions. But that changed, luckily, because all Indians in India have come into your own. Thank God. And you've come into recognizing the richness of your own culture. So my own work is not necessary now. What my work is about was a record back of the 70s and 80s when there was little documentation being done. But now there are thousands and thousands of people in India, Indians, who are doing fabulous work, documenting, making these documentation in one form or another, or finding and supporting the traditional craftspeople to make things that are viable in the 21st century, that are usable now, or can be exported, or can be transformed into something that is a useful object that may be saleable in shops in the United States or whatever it might be. Those people have taken the people of India. I don't need to do this work anymore. This represents my books, and my memoir represent how I was transformed by it. But India itself, you all have transformed, as you should, into a country and a people who is rightfully proud of one of the most remarkable cultures in the world. And it's not that I see India with rose-colored glasses. Believe me, I've been in very difficult situations and had some very hard times, but always within the experience of this larger, welcoming and healing culture that has helped me also transform and be who I am today. So I welcome India, what India is becoming in the 21st century. I welcome the voices and the strengths, and I welcome the new technologies that are constantly evolving and changing. I will be in Bangalore in February, giving a lecture at the Museum of Art and Photography, because the ways in which they're using contemporary technology to record and express and convey traditional and innovative ways of seeing the world in an outreach that's global. I am floored by that. That is India. That is India of the 21st century. That and many other places.
Yes,
And
Matt is doing some wonderful work, actually. So, what's that one key message that you really like to want readers to take away from your book, and you would want every listener to remember, after this episode is out? What would that be? What would be that key message?
Listen. Just listen. Just be quiet and listen to your families, to the people around you. Listen and be open to who they are. Because I think if we can be open and listen with our hearts, we find there is a richness of humanity that is valuable in every person we meet. India has given me so much, and it has that to offer to anyone who only, we sometimes we get so busy in our lives. And we get on such a trajectory. I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do that we sometimes forget to be quiet and just acknowledge where we are or who it is that I'm sitting here in this room with talking to. I mean, why? It's such a privilege to talk with you, to start my day today, because it's morning here, to start my day with this conversation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Equally from my side too, that it's been such an honor to have you on the podcast today, because it's very rare that one meets somebody like you whose love just emanates from every pore, from every cell of your being just reveals how much you love this country and how much you've been able to not be colored with judgment about India, being from America. And that, I think, requires a very, very special empathy that's inside you, a sensitivity, a willingness to learn and embrace. And
only because of those wonderful, wonderful people who've taken me in and embraced me and accepted me. I was this odd young man, but I was open and I listened.
Yeah.
And
so, you were open and you listened. So those are those words that's going to stay back. Thank you for taking all the time, and we wish you lots and lots of luck and all the best. Stephen, thank you for taking all the time. It's been an honor.
I do appreciate it. Bye.